And Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and the children. "Who are these with you?" he asked. Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." Then the maidservants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, "What do you mean by all these droves I met?" "To find favor in your eyes, my lord," he said. But Esau said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "No, please," said Jacob. "If I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Now that you have received me favorably, please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. The scripture as it is written. May God add a blessing to the reading and the hearing of his most holy word. You may be seated. As you take your seat, take the hand of at least one somebody and say to them, "Friend, why do you think Esau forgave Jacob?" Turn to somebody else and go, Say, "Friend, why do you think Esau forgave Jacob?" Amen. That's my subject for the morning. Why Esau forgave Jacob. Now, in last week, I told you that I am beginning this year preaching about Christian fundamentals. And last week we established that the foundation of our total spiritual life, spirituality, spiritual walk with God, issues forth out of the strength or the lack thereof of our private, our personal devotional life, that solitariness, to use the word of Bootman, that we spend with God. The songwriter put it this way: "I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses." It is that private time with God in the study of his word, in the practice of prayer and meditation, where God in the stillness stills our spirit, speaks into our spirit. It is out of that time that comes convictions of sin that needs to be cut away. It is out of that time that comes encouragements that pushes back despair that would otherwise settle in like cloud cover and block the light of God's continued inspiration. It is in that time when we fight our way through depressions that it would otherwise seize upon our spirit. It is in that time where we are restored and healed from the wounds that are inflicted by life, and 1,000 lacerations after another, one cut at a time, till there's a straw that would otherwise break the camel's back. It is in that time when we have breakthroughs in our understandings and new understandings are imparted. And to an extent that we experience victory in Jesus and grow in grace and character is transformed and deliverance is experienced, it is fed and fueled and sustained in that quiet time with God. And to the degree that those things escape us and stay out in front of us, it has everything to do with our dearth, our negligence in giving God time with us. God can never do through you what you won't first let God do in you. And you can never have God's favor without God's fellowship. And so that becomes our foundation, our base between us. It feeds every aspect of our lives, from our ministry work, our family life, our emotional health and well-being. It is all fed and fueled and kept and fanned by that private time with God. This week, it's still with an attention on fundamentals and foundation setting. I want to talk about the subject that should never be too far from us, the subject that we need to always come back to reiterate, the thing that we are constantly in need of, and that is the practice of forgiveness. The practice of forgiveness. It is the subject that is always needful, always timely, and the thing that we are always in need of. For forgiveness is that thing in life that is to be a way of life. It is not a thing we do and complete and we're done with and we can move on. It is a way of life. This is the time of year where people are engaging in making New Year's resolutions, as we said on last week, and I encourage that because people ought to rethink and revisit what they're aiming for, what they're striving for in life. An unexamined life, Cicero said, is a life that ultimately is displeasing to God, and he who aims for nothing hits it. So in the name of at least aiming, you may miss it, but if you don't aim, you certainly won't hit it. And one of the things that we do this time of year is we aim for some reworking, some attention to the needs of the physical man from the outside sense. They tell us that the average American gains 7.5 pounds during the holiday season. 7.5 pounds from Thanksgiving to Christmas, 7.5 pounds. Now what that translates into is when you put your pants on this morning, brothers, the belt notch that you pulled it to before Thanksgiving is about a belt notch or two behind where you pulled it to this morning. And ladies, what that translates into, the dress that you was gonna wear this morning, but it just didn't kind of look right. It was kind of pinching and pulling, and you said the cleaner shrunk your dress. No, that's that 7.5. Help me, somebody. That's that 7.5 that was not there the last time you tried to wear it in mid-November. And so people are buying gym memberships, whether or not they carry through on it, Perry, or not, they're buying gym memberships because they want to get rid of that 7.5. Now that's the average. Some people is higher, some people is lower, but we in there somewhere. Most of us turn the top of the year knowing that we have a little bit too much abundance. And in the mathematics of God, we now need to subtract what we added. But not only are we trying to sweat away the holiday pounds, but flying off the shelf at Walgreens and CVS and all the pharmaceutical places are these colon cleanse things, detoxification products, because through the holiday season we have loaded up on the high fatty foods, sugary foods, and high in cholesterol and salt. God knows we don't want our cholesterol taken right now. We want to wait till around Easter. And as a result, people almost as a ritual at the beginning of the year, they want to detoxify the body. I was in the barbershop on yesterday, and a brother came to me. He hung around, and he walked up to me and he said, Rev, he said he had this colon cleanse product. He says, you look like you could use a colon cleanse. And I got offended because I don't know exactly what someone who needs a colon cleanse look like, but it just seemed to me whatever it is, it ain't a good look. So I was offended, I'll be honest. So I didn't take his product because if you offend me, I usually don't cooperate with you. But it's the time of year where people are walking around offering folks a need. Is that there is the sense that we've picked up some junk, and the reality is that the body, the reason why these products are flying off the shelf is because our natural bodies, no matter how regular you think you are, that the body unless there is a proactive plan put in place, it holds on to a certain amount of waste material that should have been expelled, and we begin to suffer from backed up, compacted waste material. Backed up, compacted waste material. And now some of you who are my vintage, or a little bit before, a little after, know that there once was a time when the elders, the folk, your mama, your big mama, your auntie and them, that they had a ritual they went through this time of year, maybe around Easter. A couple of times a year they grab all little children, and adults too, but they grab all little children and set you down, and they gave you the cure-all, that castor oil. They might mix it in with something, but whether you got it straight up on the rocks or with a twist, they gave you that castor oil, and then you sat still for the next day or two while the castor oil and God ran their course. All your plans was canceled because they weren't educated, but they weren't unwise. They understood that our bodies, right, wrong, or indifferent, there's a certain amount of waste material that gets backed up and compacted. And they weren't looking at any medical reviews or surveys, but they understood that if you don't intentionally clean that stuff out, then you start feeling bloated and puffy, and you start getting all clogged up, and your energy becomes sluggish, and then all that makes you susceptible to bacteria and viruses. You start catching colds, but then even more serious things. Doctors will tell you that backed up, compacted stuff makes you more susceptible to more serious stuff like cancer, and you can suffer migraine headaches, and all because unbeknown to you may be that you have not done what needs to happen so that you can address the reality. You've got some waste material that's backed up and compacted. And we get this point so clearly. We all get it when it comes to our physicality, but for whatever reason, this point escapes us when it comes to our spirit, our soul, our psyche, because not only does the human body, but the human heart and the human mind has this tendency of holding on to old waste material that gets backed up and gets compacted. And when we are backed up and compacted, we begin to suffer from the diseases, the symptoms of bitterness and resentfulness and sadness and moodiness. Some of us are suffering from psychosclerosis. That's a hardening of the attitudes, and which is simply symptomatic of the fact that we got some waste material that's backed up and compacted. And Jesus wanted us to know that the part of the lifestyle of a Christian has to be that we are people who practice God's form of castor oil, God's form of psychological, emotional, spiritual enema, which is this thing we call forgiveness. And forgiveness is never to be understood as letting someone off the hook, but rather forgiveness is better understood in a matter of spiritual maintenance as it is the practice, the ritual we go through so that we can become unhooked from the toxic past, to cleanse our mind, our spirit, our emotions of the waste material that otherwise is backed up and compacted and makes us more susceptible to spiritual disease that compromises our witness, our power, and our joy. And the text before us is really the story about a man, Esau, who literally forgave his way into abundant life, as opposed to continuing to hate his way into an ever-deepening hell. And that's a choice that we all have today. Can I say that? Did all of us, as we are sitting here in the issues of our life and pushed and pulled by tomorrow's promises, because it does not yet appear what we shall be, and yet yesterday's pain is pulling in the other direction, and you got to decide if you're going to consciously sit there and allow waste material left over from yesterday's burdens and heartaches and pains to compromise tomorrow's potential potential blessings. You are either in the choice you make to forgive or stay stuck in unforgiveness. It is a choice between forgiving your way into abundant life or continuing to hate your way into an ever-descending hell. Did I tell this side of the room? The choice today is between forgiving your way into an abundant life in a place of peace and power and purpose, or continuing to hate your way into an ever-deepening hell. I don't think y'all caught it over here. The choice is between forgiving your way into an abundant life of peace and power and purpose and deliverance, or continuing to hate your way into an ever deepening hell. Esau literally forgave his way into an abundant life. Now, the story about Jacob and Esau, and I'm so glad to be preaching today because I'm not under stress since the game was yesterday. Y'all will sit here about 4 hours with me today because you just relax. You ain't got nothing to do. Touch your neighbor and say, I hope Pastor just take all day long today. I've never seen so many people ignore me in one place before. Oh, help us, God. The conflict, the impasse between Jacob and Esau started 20 years earlier. Now, Jacob and Esau were twin brothers, born to Isaac and Rebekah. Though they were twins, though, sequentially in the exiting of the womb, Esau came out first, with Jacob as second, clutching his brother's heel. And so technically then that Esau was the older of the two, the firstborn. And since these ancient peoples named the children based upon the circumstances into which they were born, Jacob was given the name Jacob, which meant supplanter, trickster, hustler, deceiver. The inference was, this is a con man who's going to get what he wants in life through deceit, deception. The kind of dude you can't trust around your wallet or your woman. Y'all fellas know that dude? Don't look his direction right now. Just keep it on your mind. And so as they grew up there, because Esau was the oldest, he had a customary and legal entitlement and a spiritual entitlement to two things. That was a birthright and a blessing, both of which Jacob swindled him out of. Now, if you look at the 25th chapter when you go home, read it when you go home. It tells the story of how, as they got older, Jacob was a shepherd and a herdsman, and Esau was a hunter. And the hunters, they were the persons who went out into the wild. These were more masculine men. And Esau, he was hairy all over. He was an unshaven man. He was wild and untamed. Almost like John, that curious, wild figure out on the rivers of Jordan administering the baptism of repentance. Wild and camel's hair. This is the kind of personality that Esau was. He was a man's man. He was a macho man, a lumberjack type of man. He worked with his hands. He was the kind of man that if he didn't catch it, he didn't eat. And he was a pull it up by the bootstraps type of man. He would brave virgin territory and the wiles of what might be out there in the brush. And by his own hand and his own skill, he would kill the wild beasts and make a meal for himself and for his dependents. Jacob, on the other hand, he was the kind of dude who went to work in a suit, and he had an office and a briefcase and got a pedicure and a manicure. He was a dude who didn't like stuff too rough. He didn't spend a whole lot of time at the gym. He was kind of clean shaven. And he was, as a shepherd, shepherds came along after areas had been deforested and roads had been laid. And they were part of settled communities. They didn't go out and brave no wild. They more settled existence. This was Jacob. They had very different personalities, and they represented two contending factions of the economy: the hunters versus the herdsmen and the shepherds. And so when Esau going out coming back from an unsuccessful hunting trip and near famish, he hasn't caught anything, he hasn't eaten anything, And Jacob, being true to his word, decides that he wants his brother's birthright. And so he makes him a great big old bowl of gumbo with okra and some crab and some sausage and some shrimps and put it all in there. Or maybe a great big old bowl of some red beans and rice. And caught his brother at a low moment. Brothers, never make a critical decision when you're under the burden of your nature. And he put the bowl in front of him and let him smell up on it real good. And his brother was finished. He said, man, give me that gumbo. And he said, and he pulled it back from him. No, if you want it, I'll sell it to you. For what? For your birthright. It should have been a quick and easy dismissal because the value of the two are not the same. But it's amazing the decisions we will make in the moment when we're pressed by the flesh. Come on, somebody. Anybody ever here made a decision in the moment when pressed by the flesh? Say amen under your breath. Just bat your eyes. Don't put your business in the street. In the moment when pressed by the flesh, somehow things seem distorted and you lose the value of things. And he sold his birthright. Now the birthright implied two things. Perry, the birthright had to do with the material inheritance. The birthright that whoever was the oldest son had a natural right to a double the inheritance of any other brothers, but it was also the appointment of stature within the family clan. These were nomadic peoples and they moved as clans, and the oldest boy was the leader of the clan. And so his brothers and sisters and all their families followed him. Wherever he moved, they moved just like that because they followed the leader of the clan. And so he would have double the inheritance, and he was the leader of the clan. And Jacob was going after the birthright. He wanted the stuff and the power. And he caught his brother at a weak moment, offered him this big old bowl of gumbo or some red beans and rice, and he took it. He took it. He took it. Now Jacob had the birthright. And then years later, when Isaac got old, as was customary, when the great patriarch was about to die, lest he die suddenly, otherwise on his deathbed he'd gather around his sons, daughters, kids, grandkids, and he would pronounce blessings. Now, they believe, these ancient people of the Orient, as it was called then, it's politically incorrect language now, but they called it ancient people of the Orient. They believed that the elder had the power of prophecy. Prophecy was not to be just understood as forth-telling, forth-seeing future events. You were not just a seer, if you may. But power of prophecy was to be able, with the power of the word, to set destinies in motion. You not only could see what was coming, but you could in fact shape what was coming by the pronouncement of it. You could pronounce blessings or curses that would go down to the 10th generation. Out of the mouth we speak of life or death, they said. And you see a bit of it in the New Testament when Jesus says to the apostles, he said, what's bound on earth, what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. That somehow now the heaven entrusts, affords earthen vessels a bit of divine power and allows you to set things in motion. And so the elder would gather around their bed and make pronouncements that would shape destinies for generations to come. And in this case, as Isaac is getting old, death is now near, he says to the oldest boy Esau, I'm about to die, and so I want you to go hunting, get some venison, make me that good venison stew of yours that I like, bring me a bowl of it, I want to have a good last meal, and then I want to bless you. And his mother, Rebecca, overhears the conversation, and somehow or another, Rebecca had kind of a distorted a parenting paradigm. It was a preferential paradigm. Though she birthed both these boys, she had a preference for Jacob. And when she heard Esau saying that he was, after getting some stew, going to bless Jacob, she went, or bless Esau, she went and told Jacob, your daddy is about to pronounce a blessing on him, so here's what I want you to do. Go kill one of the lambs in your herd that we already have. While he's out hunting, just go kill some livestock we have here. Make some stew with him, and then go take some animal's hair and put it on your arms, because your brother's all hairy and you smooth shaven and everything. So when he touched you, he'll think it's him. So they deceived him, they hoodwinked, they bamboozled the old blind man. And Isaac then unknowingly pronounced the irrevocable blessing onto Jacob that he intended for Esau. And once it was spoken, it could not be taken back. And then after he pronounces the blessing, which was that your brothers shall all be subordinate to you. You shall be a greater nation, a greater people. Your issue, your posterity that comes out of you will be greater than theirs. Then Esau returns from the field with the venison, makes the stew, and says, Father, I'm ready for your blessing. He says, oh my God. He said, I already gave it to you. He said, what are you talking about? And then he realized he's been tricked, but he can't take it back. I've opened my mouth to the Lord and I cannot go back. It's irrevocable, irreversible. And so he goes to his death having blessed the wrong child with a blessing that he intended for the other. And Esau then cries out, is there no blessing for me? His father is sick, near death, and out of respect for daddy, he says, I ain't gonna do nothing now. I'm gonna stay my hand. But he looks at Jacob and he tells him, he says, no sooner do we get done with the ashes to ashes and the dust to dust, it ain't gonna be good for you, bro. Because I'm about to go NWA on you. I'm about to lose my mind up in here. You may want to bounce because when daddy goes down, you going after him soon. He made it when James Brown on him, said, I don't know karate, but I do know crazy, and I'm about to go crazy. When daddy's dead, it's going to be on. And Jacob, hearing that, his mama tells him, don't wait around for your daddy's funeral. You need to get out of here now. And he bounces, he goes to the next county and runs up and hangs out, hides out with his uncle Laban for these past 20 years. And now he has received word, Jacob has received word that through a messenger that Esau is coming to see him, and he's rolling deep with over 400 servants. Last time he saw him 20 years ago, the boy said, I'm gonna kill you sure enough when daddy is dead. And now it's 20 years later, here he come rolling deep with 400 and some odd men. And you can imagine how Jacob interpreted his intentions. Now they say, Apostle Paul said in the New Testament that when we're under stress, a bit of the old man and old woman always hangs on, even after we saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, and anointed with Holy Ghost power from on high. Hallelujah. Stress can cause a bit of the old person to come back to us because we always revert back to what we knew first, even if it ain't good sometimes. Somebody say, I know what he's talking about. And so what Jacob does, whose name was Trickster, who had lived off of his cunning, because Esau said of him, he has beguiled me twice. Took my birthright and my blessing. That's the same word that was used in Genesis for the woman and the serpent in the garden when they ate that forbidden fruit, and God asked Adam what he done. He said, the woman you gave me, she beguiled me. And he asked the woman, she said, the serpent, he beguiled me. I've been tricked, I've been conned, I've been deceived. And so now here you have a situation where Jacob feels threatened. And even though he's been wrestling with angels and God has changed his name from Jacob to Israel, because Israel now means God rules, and he's at a different place in his faith walk, and he's not what he used to be, but we find out he's still not yet all of what God wants him to be, because when he realized that Esau's coming rolling deep with 400 plus men, rather than just trusting God, he decides that he's got to resort back into his old bag of tricks. And so he decides, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and appease his anger. And he then takes half of his livestock, hundreds of head of livestock. There's camels, there's rams, there's sheep, there's bulls. And in each instance, there's more females than males that he gives, because with the females, they will continue to reproduce. You got one rooster and 10 hens, you got 10 eggs. If you got 10 roosters and 1 hen, you got 1 egg. And so he gave him hundreds of heads of livestock with the potential for thousands. It is an investment, a very lucrative investment. And he arranges them in droves. He puts some livestock here, a little space, then another row of livestock, and then some space, and another row of livestock. And then he starts arranging the humans that are part of his crew. He takes all of his servants and he lines them up in droves with a little space in between. Then he takes his wives and their children, the 2 handmaidens and their children, lines them up. And then he takes Leah, one of his two legal wives. It takes her and her 6 children, lines them up. And then last but least, there is Rachel, and Joseph. Benjamin isn't born yet. And he's at the back at this point. And his thinking is that if Esau goes Al-Qaeda on the first wave, the further you are from the front, you got more time to escape. And he's literally using his livestock, his servants, and his wives and children as human shields for himself. This is not a picture of courage or valor. It's a picture of cowardice and narcissism, as he's willing to throw everybody under the bus to save his own skin. And as the livestock will go out there, and Esau comes, and this well laid out scheme to appease anger, and if I can't appease, structure it so I got some time to get out of Dodge, get out of harm's way. And Esau does not react violently, and as he sees that he does not take out the livestock and the servants, then Jacob comes in front of the rest of the family, bows before him 7 times, and uses the language of submission. He refers to his brother as my lord, and begins to try and appease him with all these gifts. And he finds that Esau doesn't even want to talk about the past. Amazing. He says that he grabbed him, he hugged him, he kissed him, and he wept. And Jacob is really clearly taken back. In fact, he even says, what's with all these droves and waves and people and livestock? He says, I want to give a gift to you. And he tells him, I don't need it. I have enough. And the question becomes, Sister Phyllis, how did he get from Negro, I'm going to kill you, to weeping and hugging and not even wanting to talk about the past? That's the question, because that's the question for you. How do you get from seething rage that continues to perpetuate dysfunction in the church, in the home, on the work site, whenever the family gets together, to the point where there's no even need to talk about the past? Gerhard von Rad said the answers are both explicit and implied in the way in which the narrative is written. He said the first reason is more inferred, and that is that Esau was able to forgive Jacob here in the story because there had been enough time, these 20 years, he had gone from playing the blame game to where he had done some introspection and acknowledged, owned, and admitted his own complicity in the loss of his birthright and blessing. See, there are times in life where people are real victims, total victims, where they literally couldn't have done anything any different. When you think of the 2,000 people that were killed by Boko Haram this past week in Nigeria, most of them women and children and elderly and sick folk who couldn't get away. They're true victims. There's nothing they could have done. They don't share any blame for what happened. There are people, children molested, and others. There are times in life when you've dealt with somebody honestly and they just dealt with you deceitfully, and there's no blame to be shared. Yes, but there are other times in life, and this story is one of those times in life, where Esau, with the long lens of time doesn't change wounds, but it can change perspectives. When you look back over your life and think things over, and he looks back over and sees that part of the reason why Jacob was able to steal his birthright and his blessing was his own negligence and how he stewarded it. And the truth of the matter is, Jacob and his mama Rebecca could in no ways, no matter how deceitful or cunning or low down they were, they could have only tempted or taunted, but there's no way they could have ripped from his hand, wrestled free from his hand, that birthright and blessing unless he gave it away. Unless he gave it away. Unless he gave it away. And, the story says that when he came back, that he offered him a bowl of venison. And he prioritized the belly over the things of God. And he gave it away. He gave it away. There's a story of a man who grew up in the South, one of them little small towns off the beaten path where everybody know everybody. And folk don't even bother to lock their doors. They feel that safe and that secure. That ain't your neighborhood, but this is the neighborhood that guy grew up in. And as fate would have it, he grew up and work took him to the big city. But he continued to live like he was in the small town down south. And people told him, you ain't in the small town now. You can't speak to everybody walking down the street. Folk think you're trying to do something to them. And you can't leave your doors open. You need to start locking your doors. He said, no, where I'm come from, we don't lock our doors and stuff. He said, you're not where you came from. You're where you are. But he continued to live like he was still in that little small town. And as fate would have it, one day he needed to go down to the little mini mart at the edge of the block and get a few things. And when he came back, his apartment had been cleaned out. You know, all the stereo system, the TV, the flat screens, all the electronic stuff, anything that the computers, everything they could pull out and turn over into quick cash on the street, he had been cleaned out. Well, he filed a police report, and several days later, they found the people, found the man that had taken the stuff, and they found him selling it out of the trunk of his car. Probably like that guy I met in the barbershop yesterday. And so there was an arraignment, a hearing, where the guy was facing charges of grand larceny because of the value of the stuff that was taken, and also breaking and entering. And the judge asked the guy, how did he plead? And he said, I plead not guilty. And the man whose stuff had been taken was in the back of the courtroom, and he said, you liar! You liar! You took my stuff. They saw you selling out of the trunk of your car. And the judge took his gavel and he hit the gavel and said, sir, you're going to have to sit down. He said, but judge, he's lying. He said, sir, this is not the trial. This is just a pretrial hearing just to get him to enter a plea. The trial will come later. We just want to enter a plea and set bail bond. And so the man sat down, sulking, arms crossed, and the man made bail. And so they crossed each other in the foyer of the courtroom. And the man whose stuff had been taken said to the other man, he said, how can you stand there and just lie like that in the courtroom? You know you took my stuff because they saw you selling it out of the trunk of your car. And the man said, I didn't lie. He said, yes, you did. He said, because I heard you. You said not guilty. He said, listen. He said, I never said I didn't sell your stuff out the trunk of my car. I didn't even say I didn't go in your house. He said, I pleaded not guilty to breaking and entering. I didn't break in. The door was wide open. I just walked in and took what I wanted. Sometimes, my brothers and my sisters, the robbery that we accused others of is helped along by the fact that we have not so well stewarded the blessings that God gave us. And yes, there's a thief that comes but to kill, to destroy, and to steal and to tear down. But we may sure make it doggone easy when we leave the doors wide open. You mad at the person who you trained and now they fired you, and that person's in your job or supervising you, and yet when you are on the job, or as long as you've been on the job, you know, you always use up all your sick days, and you always get sick on Friday and Monday. You got that weekend extending illness, and your 15-minute breaks are always about 17 or 18 minutes. Your half-hour lunches are more like 45, and your hour lunch becomes the rest of the afternoon off. And you the last one there, the first one to leave, and you always want to do just enough. You suck your teeth and roll your eyes when they ask you for something, and now somebody else wants to come in a little early, stay a little later, has enthusiasm for their job. They go the extra mile, and you wondering why they fired you and kept them. You had the job, you wanted the paycheck, but you really didn't appreciate the job. How well have we stewarded the blessings that you had? You mad at somebody that you was close to, now they're not talking to you, they're not calling you, and they calling, they talking to somebody else, and now you mad they stole somebody from you that you didn't have talked to. How well do you steward what you have? There's times in life when we're really victimized. Then there are other times in life when if we're honest about it, some point we got to stop blaming others and ask ourselves, how well have I stewarded the blessings on somebody came in and took your ministry? How attentive were you to your ministry? How much time, how much effort did you put in upgrading your skills, and energy did you put in? You just like the title. You just squatting in position, but not pouring yourself out like a living sacrifice. Sometimes we have not stewarded well, and we have left the door wide open for the thief to come and do what you knew what the thief wanted to do in the first place: kill, to destroy, and to tear down. I think Esau forgave his brother because when Esau looked back over his life, the text is clear. It says Esau despised his blessing. What is it about us? Where does this sinister strain in the human spirit comes where we don't miss our water till the well runs dry? Huh? But then Von Rod says in his commentary that more explicit than the inferred nature of this kind of introspective admissions of not so good stewarding of the blessing was the fact that when Esau looks back over his life, he also saw that people cannot really take from you what God has for you. You know, there's a song that says, what God has for me, he has for me. And the truth of the matter is that while Esau seemed to have taken the birthright and the blessing that came with being the firstborn, God had another blessing for Esau. So much so that when they get there and Jacob is trying to appease Esau with his financial holdings, his livestock, Esau says, I don't need it. I have enough. He shows up with 400 servants. He's got more servants than Jacob has. He's got more head of cattle than Jacob has. He's got more lamb, more livestock than he had. He's got a bunch of women, a bunch of wives and children and so forth. He got what he got. He don't need his stuff. He got his own. And if you look at the 36th chapter, which gives the descendancy of the descendants, the posterity of Esau, you see that Esau's descendants, which went by the name of the Edomites, became a nation state generations before the Israelites became a nation state, while they were still nomads south of the region of Judah. They had a landmass greater than that of Israel, and numbers that were more. Most of the northern Arab tribes of today trace their ascendancy back to Edom and back to Esau. His numbers are greater than the numbers of Jews alive today. God had another blessing for him. It may have been the case that the only thing that Jacob did and his mama do is they successfully wrestled from him the blessing that the culture had for him, but that God didn't really have for him. Sometimes people think you ought to have this, and society and the world says you ought to be in this way, serve in this way, but God has something very much different in store for you, and God will raise up an enemy to position you for his blessing. Oh, come on, you see what happened come on, somebody, you saw what happened in the life of Jacob's own children when the next to the youngest boy, Joseph, was sold into slavery by his brothers. But being sold into slavery, that was the beginning of a long process that led to prison, betrayal, and ultimately his gift made him the deputy Pharaoh of all of Egypt, the second most powerful man in the world. And then when Joseph was reunited with his brothers, he told them, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Folk can break your heart, lie to you, betray you, but what they cannot do is change God's will for you. What God has for you, God has for you. And sometimes God will raise up an enemy or let somebody break your heart to position you for your real blessing. See, God has a cell phone GPS theology. At the beginning of our lives, God presses in the coordinates to your current location, wherever you and your family is when you're born, and God places in a destination. And then he hits start. And as we go through life, sometimes we take bad turns. And see, my phone, I got a GPS system where there's a voice that speaks to me. I call that voice Sheila Jackson. And this chick talks me all the way through. And I feel secure when I hear her voice coming through the stereo system in my car, just talking me through. But sometimes I get stubborn and I'm told to turn right, exit here, and I think I know better, and I take another turn. Now I'm lost. But the voice in the phone never says, that was stupid. There's no judgment no condemnation. It just tells me, it just calculates where I am. Because see, there's a satellite overhead. There's more going on than what the eye can see. There's a satellite way out in space that calculates where I am when I get lost, and simply then gives me more instructions on how to get back to where God intended for me in the first place. Go 100 feet, take a U-turn, go back here. No matter what I do or is done to me, it doesn't matter if I run into construction or an accident, the voice in the phone never forfeits its commitment to the destination that was plugged in at the start. And no matter what happens, it just weaves it into the plan. And that's the way God is. You may take a wrong turn, a bad turn, what you think is a bad turn, but all things work together for good for them that love the Lord and are called according to, oh God, I wish I had a prayer church, that are called according to his purpose. What God has for me, he has for me. Brothers. As Marvin Gaye said, fathers, we don't need no more escalation of the violence. You ain't got to get even with, no. Sisters, stop worrying about the other sisters. Listen, brothers, can't no dude take from you what God has for you, because God will weave it into his plan. Brothers, I need brothers, all the brothers in the house, stand up right now. Stand up, brothers. Stand up, brothers. Teddy Pendergrass says, stand up. Go to the next brother closest to you and look at him straight in the eye and say, brother, can't no dude take from you what God has for you. Now give him a dap. Brothers, sit down. All the ladies, stand up. Turn to the ladies closest to you. Take her by the hand. Look her in the eye. Take a lady, look in the eye and look at her and say, sister, can't no heifer take your blessing. Come on, say it again and say it from a deep place. I'm just talking how you talk outside. Say, sister, can't no heifer take your blessing. Now sit down and give God some glory. Can't nobody take from you what God has. I'm trying to preach here. Preach, Braxton. I'm trying, Lord. Can't nobody take from you. I don't care if they sell you into slavery. I don't care if they lie on you. I don't care if they swindle you, if they hoodwink you, if they bamboozle you, because God knows where you are, and God will give you instructions no matter what you fall into to get back to that special place he has prepared for you. And Esau said, I don't need your stuff. In spite of your stuff, God blessed me with most stuff. And the only thing you did, he used your wickedness and your conniving me to wrestle me free from preoccupation with a blessing he didn't have for me in the first place, so that I could turn my attention for what he did have for me. Somebody takes somebody from you. Listen, they may have wrestled you free from a heartache so you can get where you need to go. Help me, somebody. You get fired on one job. Listen, when you're honest about it, you didn't like that job in the first place. That boss sets you free so you can go start that business that you and God been talking about all this time, so you can go back to school. It may take a little time. It may be 20 years for you feel like going back and telling one of your enemies, thank you for that lie you told on me. Thank you for that negative report you wrote up on me. Thank you for that dirty deed you did. Thank you, because if you hadn't done what you did, I wouldn't be where I am. Just keep on trusting God and see what God can do. He'll work it out. He'll work it out. He'll work it out. Then, you know, when you look at the story, you look at it closely and you see that I think another reason, you know, when we look at forgiving, honestly, one of the reasons why we can't forgive, and let me just be confessional for me, because maybe it don't apply to none of y'all, is that sometimes when folk have done me wrong, it just seems like somebody ought to pay. Is it just me? It just seemed like somebody ought to suffer something. It just seemed like God ought to roll in with heavy footsteps and just whoop somebody's behind for something. After all I went through, God got to do something to somebody. And since God works through people, if God wants to use me, execute judgment and justice. I stand here ready for service, Lord. Here I am, Lord. Use me to knock some sense on that Negro's head. Use me. I'll give him an attitude adjustment. Just 3-5 minutes, Lord. Just turn your back for 3 to 5 minutes. I swear he'll never be the same. The Lord just won't answer that prayer. He just won't answer that prayer. But see, one of the things we have to understand when we're preoccupied with this sense of they're getting away with something, nobody ever gets away with anything. Apostle Paul says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever you sow, that shall you also reap. And Isaiah said, vengeance is, God said through Isaiah, that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I shall repay. They may deserve some justice or judgment. It's just not for you to do it. God says, I shall repay. Now, when you look at the story, it is very clear that Jacob, who's still driven by a guilty conscience, everything Jacob does is indicative of the fact that he is still enslaved to the guilt over what he did in the past. And he has no idea how God has blessed Esau. He had no idea how the fullness of Esau's life. But by the same token, Esau comes to the meeting. He has no idea what has happened in the life of Jacob. So if he had spent 20 years thinking that Jacob got away with something, he would have been quite surprised to find out he had no idea that over them 20 years, everything that Jacob did to him, God did back to Jacob double and triple through his uncle Laban. Because see, the young player met an old player, and the player got played. To you young players out there, God help you when you run across an old player. He ran against somebody who knew the tricks and the traps better than he did. Oh, yeah, Jacob went over there with his uncle Laban, and see, he had 2 daughters, and he saw Rachel. Saw her at a well. Oh, Rachel was 3rd degree fine. I mean 3rd degree fine. And, you know, 1st degree fine is a double take. 2nd degree fine is, can I get your number? 3rd degree fine is, I can't sleep at night. She was 3rd degree fine. And he asked Laban for her hand in marriage. He said, yeah, but you're going to have to put in 7 years of work for her. 7 years, 7 years. Look, but not touch. No hand holding, no kissing, no nothing. All you do is look and work, 7 years. He agreed to it, signed on the dotted line. 7 years later, Jacob is itching, ready to go for the wedding and the honeymoon. But in the custom, wouldn't you know it, Sister Ann, that they veiled them up. They had lots of veils. And see, Laban had a problem on his hands. He had 2 daughters. According to the custom, you're supposed to marry the oldest one first. Her name was Leah. The problem is, as fine as Rachel was, Leah was the opposite. She was visually she was cosmetically impaired. Her visage was damaged. She was, if Rachel was the kind of girl make you do a double take, then Leah was the kind of girl that would you and you make you jump back. It was, the text called her weak-eyed Leah. That was the strongest insult, the weak-eyed Leah. And so he couldn't get rid of her on her own. Nobody would make an offering for her. So long before Comcast came up with bundling, Jacob came up with bundling. And he decided, I'm going to bundle this one because it's the only way I'm going to unload this one. And so he veiled up Leah on the wedding day and then sent to Jacob his strongest drink. Brothers, do not drink before you make a serious decision. Got him drunk. He stood up there and said, I do. She was veiled up. He didn't know what was underneath there. They went into the hut of consummation, and he started to pull them layers with excitement, looking to see Rachel's fine face, pulled off that last veil and almost dropped dead, had a heart attack when he was so weak-eyed. Leah went back to Laban and said, this is not what I contracted for. He said, you made a vow, you can't take it back. You know how we are once you make a vow. Ain't no return policy, ain't no buyer's remorse. It's yours. But I want Rachel. We got to work 7 more years. 7 more years, 7 more years. You want her? 7 gonna cost you 7 more years. Did I tell you she was 3rd degree fine? 2nd degree fine, he might have opted out, but she was 3rd degree fine. So he just 7 more years. No hand holding, no kissing, no nothing. Just working and looking, working and looking. And you got to go home and feed old weak-eyed Leah. And the 7 years is older. He said, did I say 7 years? I meant 14. 14, 20 years, 21 years. Come on, man. Listen, look at her. She is fine. Oh, God. Did I tell you she was 3rd degree fine? Can't get you out of my head. 3rd degree fine. Worked 21 years. And then at the end of 21 years, he had to run to get away from there before he added some more. So when he comes back and meets Esau, Esau has no idea what Laban has gone through. Listen, people, I learned a long time ago, can't nobody whoop you like God can whoop you. Esau didn't have to spend one day worried about trying to get even when Jacob, God knew what he needed to do to break Jacob and remake Jacob. And God knows where to find every one of us. God knows every account that needs to be settled. That's why he said, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I shall repay. What we're supposed to do is practice forgiving. How many times must I forgive my brother? 7 times? No, 70 times 70. You just keep on forgiving. You just keep on forgiving as many times as it takes to give you peace. You just keep on giving as many times as it takes so you can keep walking in love. You just keep on forgiving as many times as it takes so you can sleep at night. You just keep on forgiving as many times as it takes so that you have joy. You just keep on forgiving as many times as it takes so that the past doesn't have power over you to cancel your future. Come on, somebody. I heard somebody say, I'm pressing on the upward way. New heights I'm gaining every day. Still praying as I onward bound, Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay, though some may dwell where these abound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. And we got to forgive our way to higher ground. Esau forgave his brother, and God got even when Jacob. See the difference between when we try to settle the account and God tried to settle the account? See, when we try to get even with somebody, we want to annihilate them. Have I got a witness? We want to hurt them to hurt them. We want to break them to break them. But when God chastises us, he chastises us so that he can remake us. He breaks us to remake us, because the same God who's changing you also died to change the person who hurt you. So God may chastise me and chastise you, but God is trying to bless both me and you. And I see 2 men who have been blessed through the years, and that's the way God is. When God does it, there are not winners and losers. There's just degrees of winning. When the devil does it, there's winners and losing. And you let the devil get a hold of you, and there will be degrees of winning and losing. But when we do it God's way, God can bless me and bless my enemy. And God can deal with my enemy, so much so that I can go ahead on and bless those who curse me, pray for those who hate me, do good to those who despitefully use me, turn them over to God. Whatever whooping that needs to be done, God can do, and let God bless me, because what God has for me, he has for me, even if he's got to use a fool to bring it to me.